Latest bombshell report from the New York Times could get investigators closer to connecting important dots in Robert Mueller's collusion probe. It could also raise questions about whether Trump's suspiciously pro-Russian foreign policy may be criminal at its core. The story involves the biggest Trump world characters already in Mueller's crosshairs: Paul Manafort, Michael Flynn, and Michael Cohen. Mueller's investigators now probing whether they and other members of Trump's inner circle illegally pushed a pro-Russian agenda, potentially in exchange for profit, and whether any agreement reached between the Trump campaign and Russians could be linked to election meddling. According to the report, Mueller's team became suspicious of an unusual number of pro-Russian Ukrainians at President Trump's inaugurations. That would be odd. And investigators began looking into whether their ties to the Trump team were related to an illegal lobbying effort. Joining our conversation, Jeremy Bash, former chief of staff at the CIA and Pentagon, and Matt Millersback, former chief spokesman for the Justice Department. Aaron Blake and Director Brennan are still here. I have to start with you because I think, share in the responsibility if we ever normalize a sentence like Robert Mueller became suspicious at the alarming number of pro-Putin Ukrainians at the inauguration. That's not normal. I mean, what do you think from an intelligence perspective when you see all these Ukrainians pushing a peace plan at Trump's inauguration?
Well, I wasn't invited to the inauguration. So
Me neither.
I didn't notice the Ukrainians there. But I think it's been demonstrated that Donald Trump just cannot subordinate his own personal, political, and financial interests for the greater good. You know, throughout the campaign, throughout his business life, throughout the campaign, and then also as he became president of the United States. And so
on the day he was becoming.
And so consorting, colluding, or interacting with these various types, and some of them of questionable integrity, and ethics, and principles, I think is something that's come to...
All three of those men convicted felons.
Well, yes. And I think it's come to the attention of a lot of the authorities here about what actually was going on and whether or not there was any illicit, illegal, criminal activity that might have been taking place by anybody involved.
Jeremy Bash, can you just pull this thread on what the president's national security advisor, Mike Flynn, what appropriate role could he have had in meeting with pro-Putin Ukrainians in and around the inauguration? We know Michael Cohen has pleaded guilty to having pushed and lying about his interactions on the business front with Russians. And Paul Manafort, now in a world of trouble. They're at the center of this new New York Times reporting, and we know they're also of interest to Robert Mueller.
Well, this was a part of an effort, Nicole, a massive effort to engage in unregistered foreign lobbying, foreign influence inside Washington by pro-Putin forces, including Ukrainian oligarchs. And the fact that they attended the inauguration is somewhat just a symptom of this larger effort. Yeah. What I found very interesting, to build on Director Brennan's point, in the reporting by the New York Times, was that the Trump Tower Moscow project was predicated on loans from VTB and GenBank, two sanctioned Russian entities. And so the object of Felix Sater and Michael Cohen, who were engineering this financial transaction for the Trump organization, was to relax sanctions. So when the Trump Tower meeting happened in June, which we now know Donald Trump lied about, it wasn't just the Russians who wanted sanctions relieved. The Trump organization wanted sanctions relieved. So they were actually working in concert towards that mutual objective.
Let me stay here, because I think this is lost on so many people who are looking for something more dramatic. This could be a simple sort of pay-to-play, a simple corruption, bad business, simply Donald Trump doing business with Russians the way he did business in New Jersey, a low-tech crime, if you will.
Well, he had financial interests, and the Moscow Trump Tower was in some ways, for him, the signature project of his real estate empire. It was his salvation. It was his way to basically monetize the relationships that he had cultivated inside the Russian inner circle for all these many years. It's the reason he did the Miss Universe pageant, so he could have these business relationships. So that was the payoff. This was definitively a financial deal. But just one more point. We keep using the term Ukrainian peace plan. That's a euphemism. Peace plan was a way to relieve sanctions on Russia and give Donald Trump the business he sought.
And Matt Miller, it's a great point, because all the meetings that the Trump folks took were about this. The meeting at Trump Tower was about sanctions relief. That's what Mike Flynn was on the phone on the day of the inauguration with Russia. He then lied about it to Robert Mueller. I want to just dig into this piece because it's weedsy, but our viewers could sort of map out the case law of the Mueller probe at this point, so I think they can take it. From the New York Times report, the sanctions posed a potential obstacle, as you were saying, Jeremy, for the Trump Tower Moscow project. Felix Sater and Michael Cohen discussed financing from the two Russian banks Jeremy mentioned, VTB and GenBank, but the sanctions prohibited American citizens and companies from doing business with either of them, according to reporting from the New York Times and BuzzFeed. What does that tell you about what Mueller is doing? Is he following the way the money flowed to the banks? What does that tell us about the Mueller probe?
So Jeremy's right. When you see Ukrainian peace plan, it's important that this is not a Ukrainian peace plan from the Ukrainian government. These are from pro-Russian Ukrainian elements. And this is one of two pro-Russian Ukrainian peace plans that managed to make its way into the Trump administration early on. What that means, it's like when you see Russian adoptions. It's about sanctions relief for the Russians. And in some ways, that is the original sin that the special counsel is investigating. Whether the Trump administration was promising or about putting feelers out to the Russians, probably through Mike Flynn, the incoming national security advisor, potentially to others, to relieve sanctions in exchange for something else. That something else could be business dealings for Donald Trump. That something else could be help in the election. It could be a number of things. That, in a way, is at the heart of this. Has been at the heart of this investigation ever from the very beginning.
What do you think about the fact that these are the kinds of things that are dripping out at this point in the Mueller probe? In the beginning, it was a lot of the threads of the obstruction investigation. Lawyers for White House aides and people around Washington would sort of, information would come out. Now it's all these threads of the collusion investigation.
I agree completely. And actually, I was going to make that point even before you asked the question. I feel like there was a point in this investigation, maybe 6 to 9 months ago, where we thought maybe the collusion stuff had dried up. The Trump Tower, the Trump Tower meeting, not Trump Tower Moscow, thing had been in the news for a while, but really it hadn't been advanced. We had a lot of obstruction things coming out. In the last several weeks here, of course, we have the Trump Tower Moscow situation. We have Manafort giving polling to his, alleged Russian intelligence Ukrainian business colleague. And now we have this. It feels like there are a lot of dots out there that we didn't know. We don't know if Mueller is connecting those dots, if that's ever going to lead to anything. But I think the idea that this is mostly an obstruction probe, which is a perception that maybe was flawed to begin with, but a lot of us had at one point in time, as you mentioned, is kind of being put to rest right now. The collusion question seems to be very much on the table right now, and he has not abandoned that at all.
I want to read you one more thing. Individual one is the president. Cohen discussed the status and progress of the Moscow project with Individual one, a clear reference to Trump on more than the 3 occasions Cohen claimed to the committee, to which he lied. And he briefed the family members of Individual one within the company about the project. How much trouble could the president be in on these central questions of collusion and
criminal conspiracy.
Criminal conspiracy.
And money laundering.
Yeah.
And evasion.
What else?
Tax fraud.
Keep going.
All of
Don't
those
stop.
things. I think we have to remember that the FBI investigation was initially opened on this in July of 2016. So we have the FBI investigators have been working this issue first before the special counsel was established and then afterward for 2.5 years. And the FBI financial investigators are very, very good. And for those of us who have worked counterintelligence issues in years past in the Russians, you follow the money. That's the adage, follow the money. And so I'm sure the special counsel team has been meticulously pulling those threads, both domestically and internationally, to see what those financial transactions and efforts to try to avoid the different types of U.S. obstacles that are put in place in order to prevent this type of foreign manipulation of our political system. So I think what we're seeing now is indications of the things that the FBI has been able to uncover and the information that they've been able to bring together. We've seen some of it in the indictments already. Right. And I do believe that in the next month or two, we're going to see a fair amount more that is going to implicate those who are very close to Individual one.
Oh, that was too good. That was too good. What do you know? In a month or two? What?
No, I think, again, this investigation has been going on for 2.5 years, and I don't think
Bob
Mueller wants to bring this into then the start basically of the presidential campaign season. So I would anticipate that within the first half of this year, if not sooner, it's going to be concluded. Now, what the nature of his report is going to be, I think, is subject to some question. But I do think he's going to try to at least wrap up his work. He may be feeding and seeding, the different types of investigations that he has uncovered or has identified to the Southern District of New York, the Eastern District of Virginia. The State Attorney General of New York. But I don't think Bob Mueller sees that this is his lifelong career.
Thanks for the rest of his
effort.
career.
Right, exactly.